All right, video 2 for the week. All right, so we get a resurgence in sectionalism in the United States. In 1819, Missouri applies for statehood as a slave state. This set off a divisive issue as to whether slavery should expand westward. Okay, and it would. So if you add Missouri as a slave state, that upsets the balance in the Congress. The Union had 11 free states and 11 slave states at the time. So adding either one would upset a balance of political power in the Senate. So they came up with the Missouri Compromise, and they would admit Maine as a free state and Missouri as a slave state. An amendment was added to the compromise that prohibited slavery in Louisiana Territory north of Missouri's southern border. Henry Clay was the person who helped steer this compromise in the House through the House of Representatives, and they accepted it. 4 candidates ran for president in 1824, and they were all from the same Republican Party, okay, and all were favorite sons, or men who had the support of leaders from their own state and region. Henry Clay of Kentucky and Andrew Jackson of Tennessee represented the West, and John Quincy Adams of Massachusetts was the favorite son of New England. William Crawford of Georgia had the support of the South. So, in the election, Jackson ends up winning the popular vote. But he had no candidate won a majority in electoral colleges. You have 4 of them. It's just going to split them all up. The election then went to the House of Representatives to select the president from the 3 candidates with the highest number of electoral votes. Clay was eliminated, so what he did was to throw his support behind John Quincy Adams, and this helped Adams win the House vote. Clay hoped Adams would support his Clay's American system, which was a system to develop a national bank, protective tariffs, and new roads and canals throughout the country. Jackson's supporters accused Adams and Clay of working in a corrupt bargain, in which Clay was accused of winning votes for Adams in return for a cabinet post as Secretary of State. Jackson and his supporters took the name the Democratic Republicans and later shortened their names to the Democrats, so the Republicans finally kind of split apart. Adams and his followers became known as the National Republican. Okay, President Adams proposed a program of nationalist legislation that included internal improvements, a national university, astronomical observatories, and funding for scientific research. Yay! I gotta get a drink. In the early 1800s, many states eliminated property ownership as a qualification for voting. Yay, more people can vote. As a result, many more men gained the right to vote. Not women, not African Americans, and not Native Americans. Okay, at the same time, the number of people who owned property had increased, so particularly in the West and the South. So we come to the presidential candidates for 1828 were John Quincy Adams, who was running as the incumbent, and Andrew Jackson was running again. The candidates resorted to mudslinging, which meant they were criticizing each other's personalities and morals. Just look to the TV right now, and you can see that on TV with Donald Trump and all those guys. Adams claimed that Jackson was incompetent. Jackson portrayed himself as the candidate of the common man and said that Adams was an out-of-touch aristocrat. Jackson was portraying himself as an early-day George W. Bush. Okay, so Jackson won the election of 1828. Many voters who supported him were from the West and the South, rural and small-town men who thought Jackson would represent their interests. President Jackson believed in the participation of the average citizen in government. So he also supported what was called the spoils system. It was a practice appointing people to government jobs on the basis of party loyalty and support. Spoils go to the winners. Okay, he believed that this practice extended democracy and opened up the government to average citizens. To make the political system more democratic, Jackson supported a new way in which presidential candidates were chosen. It was called a caucus, in which congressional party members would choose the nominee. Jackson's supporters replaced this system with the National Nominating Convention. Under this system, delegates from the states met at conventions to choose the party's presidential nominee. Okay, the nullification crisis. In the early 1800s, South Carolina's economy had been weakening, and many people blamed the nation's tariffs. So South Carolina purchased most of its manufactured goods from England. So the high tariffs made these goods very expensive. So when Congress levied a new tariff in 1828, they called it the Tariff of Abominations. South Carolina threatened to secede or withdraw from the Union. It's the first time they do this. Okay, so John C. Calhoun, the nation's vice president, he was torn between supporting the nation's policies and supporting fellow South Carolinians. Instead of supporting secession, he proposed an idea of nullification. This idea argued that because states had created the federal union, they had the right to declare a federal law null or not valid. The issue nullification erupted again in 1830 in a debate between Senator Robert Hayne of South Carolina and Senator Daniel Webster of Massachusetts on the Senate floor. Hayne defended states' rights, while Webster defended the Union. President Jackson, he ends up defending the Union. After Congress passed another tariff law in 1832, South Carolina called a special convention that declared the tariffs of 1828 and 1832 unconstitutional. Jackson considered this declaration an act of treason and actually threatened to send troops down to South Carolina. After Senator Henry Clay pushed through a bill that would lower tariffs gradually until 1842, South Carolina basically repeals its nullification and tariff law. Okay, so slavery during this time remains a divisive issue throughout the nation. Jackson, who was a slaveholder himself, largely ignored this issue, focusing on Native Americans and the National Bank. President Jackson supported the idea of moving all Native Americans out of the way of white settlers in the area. So in 1830, he signed the Indian Removal Act, which helped the states relocate Native Americans to uninhabited regions west of the Mississippi River, primarily Oklahoma. The Cherokee in Georgia fought the Indian Removal Act by appealing to the Supreme Court. In the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, 1831, Chief Justice Marshall supported the Cherokees' right to control their land. And also in Worcester versus Georgia, the court again ordered state officials to honor Native Americans' property rights. President Jackson refused to support this decision. So in 1838, Jackson's successor, Martin Van Buren, sent in an army to force the remaining Cherokee in Georgia to move west to what is now Arkansas and Oklahoma. Thousands of Cherokee died on the journey that became known as the Trail of Tears. It actually passes through southern Missouri just north of Cape Girardeau. Although most Americans supported the removal policy, some members of Congress and a few religious denominations condemned it. President Jackson also opposed the Second Bank of the United States, regarding it as a benefit only to the wealthy. At the time, the bank was instrumental in keeping the nation's money supply stable. Many Western settlers who needed easy credit opposed these banks' policies. President Jackson believed the bank was unconstitutional, and even though the Supreme Court had ruled otherwise. President Jackson also vetoed a bill that would extend the charter of the bank for another 20 years. So during the 1832 presidential election, President Jackson opposed the bank. Many Americans supported Jackson. Jackson viewed their support as a directive to destroy the bank. So he removed all government deposits from the bank, forcing it to call in its loans and stop lending. Okay, so by the mid-1830s, a new political party called the Whigs formed to oppose President Jackson. Many members were former National Republicans whose party had fallen apart. Unlike Jackson's Democrats, Whigs advocated expanding the federal government and encouraging commercial development. The Whigs could not settle on one presidential candidate in the 1836 election, so as a result, they ran three candidates. Jackson's popularity and the nation's continued economic prosperity helped Democrat Martin Van Buren win. However, shortly after Van Buren took office, the country experienced an economic crisis known as the Panic of 1837. Thousands of farmers lost their land in foreclosures and unemployment soared. The Whigs saw the economic crisis as an opportunity to defeat the Democrats. So in 1840 election, they nominated General William Henry Harrison for president and John Tyler, a former Democrat, for vice president. The Whig candidate defeated Van Buren. However, Harrison died 1 month after his inauguration, and Tyler then succeeded to the presidency. Tyler actually opposed many Whig policies and sided with the Democrats on issues such as refusing to support a new national bank or a higher tariff. President Tyler did establish a firm boundary between the United States and Canada in 1842 with the Webster and Ashburton Treaty, though. Okay, that ends this video number 2 for the week about the nullification of the Missouri Compromise and other issues facing the young nation. Don't forget to look for a quiz for this information. Thank you.